Hello everybody. So now I'm gonna talk about how about destroy the communication between two civilizations. The emperor above God. How about two the ancestors broke Christianity in China. Let's talk about one of the strangest religious conflicts in world history. Not a war, not a crusade, not a guy with a sword screaming, "My God is better than your God." This conflict was about something much smaller. About a Chinese Christian bowed to his ancestors. Rome looked at it and said, "This looks like worship." The Chinese emperor looked at it and said, "This looks like civilization." And the Chinese family look at both of them and say, "Can we please just respect grandma in peace?" This is the Chinese rights controversy. And honestly, if your grandma's memorial tablet can cause an international theological crisis, your family has range. Before we get to the bow, we need the timeline. Because without the timeline, this story sounds completely insane. A few European priests arrive in China. They bring clocks, maps, mathematics, astronomy, telescope, calendar. The emperor liked them. The court uses them. Christianity is tolerated, and then everything started falling apart because someone bows to grandma. That sounds like the most intense family dinner in world history. So let's slow down. The story began with Jesuits in the late 16th century. Mattel read how to spell it. Let me see.
Rixai.
Michael Rixai enters China, and Rixai is not stupid. He doesn't walk into China like, "Hello, I'm foreign, your culture is wrong, please enjoy this Latin." No, Rixai learns Chinese. He studies Confucian culture. He enters elite circles. He dresses and behaves more like a scholar than a foreign religious invader. He brings maps, mathematics, astronomy, clocks, and European knowledge. In other words, the Jesuits did not enter China only with a Bible. They enter with a Bible, a telescope, a word map, an extremely good social strategy. Basically, Rixai understand one rule of cultural exchange. If you want to enter another civilization, don't insult the front door. And it worked. The Jesuits become useful. They help with calendar, astronomy, instruments, translation, court science. They're not just missionaries, they were scientists, mathematicians, technicians, diplomats, and professional survival in silk robes. And emperors loved useful people. They may love your theology, but if you can predict an eclipse accurately, suddenly become very interesting. The first lesson is science opened the palace door, not theology, science. The Jesuits come with seven, but they also come with real good math. And in Emperor China, that matter. Because calendar are not just calendar. Astronomy was not just astronomy. A calendar tell the empire how time itself was ordered. If you control the calendar, you're not just scheduling holidays, you're touching cosmic authority. So the Jesuits were not just saying, "Please believe in God." They were saying, "By the way, your eclipse calculation is wrong." That gets attention. By the time of the Kangxi Emperor, the Jesuits had real influence. Kangxi respected their knowledge, he valued their technical skills. He liked that many of them spoke Chinese and understand court manners. In 1692, he even issued an edict of toleration. Christianity was allowed, churches were protected, missionary could work. So remember this, China didn't immediately slam the door. The door opened. That's what makes the story tragic, because the question was not simply, can China tolerate Christianity? For a while, yes. But the question is, can Christianity become Chinese without ceasing to be Catholic? Then the question exploded over one issue, ancestors. Chinese Christians still live in Chinese family, and Chinese family had rituals, ancestor tablets, bowing, seasonal ceremonies, Confucius rites, family memory, filial piety, respect for the dead. Too many Chinese people, that was not worshipping another god, that was family, that was civilization, that was gratitude with incense. It was not necessarily asking their grandma to control the weather. It was saying, I remember who came before me. I know I did not create myself. I'm part of a chain, very Chinese, emotional, but very dangerous for Rome. Because Catholic Christianity had a problem. Christianity says there's one God, one ultimate object of worship. You can worship God on Sunday, then casually add ancestors, spirits, heaven, earth, exam God, money God, and your uncle who thinks he is always right. That is not monotheism, that's a group chat. So Rome asks a serious question. When Chinese Christian bow before ancestor tablets, is that just respect? Or is it worship? Is it family memory or idolatry? Is it culture or religion? And here is where the trouble begins. In China, ritual is not that easy to separate. A bow can be family, ethics, hierarchy, memory. A bow can be civilization in body language. In modern West, people like to say, I'm spiritual, not religious. In tradition China, it was more like I'm ritual, family, ancestral, ethical, political, and slightly religious, depending on the room. Very efficient, very confusing for Rome. The Jesuits, following Rexall approach, generally argue these rites can be understood as civil rituals. They're about respect, memory, and social order. They're not necessarily worship. That was the whole genius of Jesuit strategy. They were saying, don't look at the surface of the act. Ask what it means inside the culture. A bow in China is not automatically the same as worship in Europe. A tablet is not automatically an idol. A ritual is not automatically a rival god. There was cultural translation at the highest level, but other Catholic order, especially Dominicians and Franciscans, disagree. They look at the same ritual and say, no, this is too close to religious worship. This compromises Christian monotheism. This is idolatry in silk clothing, so Christianity was not only agreeing with China, it was agreeing with itself. That's important. That's not one united West versus united China. That was Jesuits over dominations. Accommodation versus purity, translation versus boundary. China was looking at Christianity and probably thinking, you people should decide what you believe before explaining my ancestors to me. Fair point. Now we reach the heart of the episode. A Chinese Christian bows, his family sees respect. The Jesuits sees civil ritual. Rome sees possible idolatry. Kangxi sees Chinese civilization, and the ancestor sees everyone makes his memorial service extremely complicated. Same gesture, different universe. That's why cultural translation is so hard. Words are hard enough, but gesture are worse. Gesture feel obvious. Everyone thinks their body language is natural. It's not. It's cultural software. One person kneels and thinks I'm praying. Another kneels and thinks I'm apologizing. Another kneels and think I dropped my AirPods. Same body, different universe. That's what happens here. The body performs one gesture. The mind living two metaphysical words. So what was Kangxi really angry about? Not simply the Christian believing God. He had already tolerated Christianity. His deeper problem was authority. Who had the right to define Chinese ritual inside China? The emperor, Chinese family, Chinese converts, Jesuits who had lived in China for decades, or Rome? From Rome's perspective, that this was doctrine. From Kangxi's perspective, this was jurisdiction. This is the key word, jurisdiction. Who had the authority here? Kangxi could tolerate Jesuit astronomers, clocks, maps, mathematics. Honestly, he probably liked the Jesuits more than some of his own officials. At least the Jesuits could predict eclipses. Some officials couldn't even predict the consequences of their own memos. But Rome defined Chinese filial piety. That was different. That was not science. That was sovereignty. This is the real title of this episode. Not only could the emperor accept God above himself, but could the emperor accept a foreign institution above the empire? A transcendent God is one thing. A pope sending instruction to the Qing dynasty is another. Qing, one is theology, the other is jurisdiction, and emperors don't love jurisdiction problem. Nobody does. Even your landlord gets emotional if you move a chair without asking. Now imagine being Emperor of China and Rome said, by the way, we have reviewed your ancestral rituals. Kangxi's reaction was basically, you review what? But we should also be fair to Rome. Rome was not just being dramatic for fun. The Catholic Church had a real theological concern. If ancestor rites were worshipped, then allowing them would blur Christian worship. Rome feared impurity. The Jesuits feared isolation. Kangxi feared foreign control. Chinese converts feared becoming stranger in their own family. Everyone was defending something real. That's why this story it's not stupid, it's painful. If one side were obviously foolish, history would be easy. But here, everyone has a point. Rome asks, how much adaptation is too much? The Jesuits ask, how little adaptation makes faith impossible to live? Kangxi asks, who are you to define Chinese civilization from Rome? Chinese Christian asks, can someone please give me a theology that doesn't destroy dinner? That's a human drama, not just emperor versus pope, not just east versus west, but ordinary people trapped between two sacred languages. That's why Chinese rights controversy matter far beyond China. Every universal idea faces this problem. Christian, Islam, Buddhism, liberal democracy, feminism, even yoga face it. Somewhere an Asian India's sage is watching a $120 yoga class in Manhattan and thinking, this is not what I mean. When an idea travels, it changed. The real question is how much change is translation? How much change is betrayal? That's the whole problem. If Christianity allow ancestor rights, maybe it becomes more livable in China, but Rome already become less Catholic. If Christianity bans ancestor rights, maybe remain doctrinally clear. But Chinese converts may have to choose between God and family. And in China, forcing someone to choose between God and ancestor is not a small inconvenience. That's not like choosing between oat milk or whole milk. That's choosing between salvation and your entire moral universe. That's where the story becomes tragic. Christianity came close. The Jesuits had entered the court. They brought astronomy, mathematics, maps. They become respected and useful. There was a real possibility of deep cultural exchange. Then comes the question no telescope could solve. What does the bow mean? That's the whole episode. Science opened the palace door. Rucho closed again. The Jesuits could explain eclipses. They could correct calendar, build instruments, draw the world on a map, but they couldn't solve the metaphysical meaning of a Chinese bow. A bow is not a technical problem. It's a civilizational problem, very polite clothing. Then we can answer the title. Could the Chinese emperor accept a god above himself? Maybe. At least we couldn't make this answer too simple. Chinese emperors already prefer rituals to heaven. They didn't claim to be God in the Christian sense. Kangxi could admire Christian morality. He could value Jesuit signs. He could tolerate church, but could he accept a foreign church claiming the authority to define Chinese rights inside China? That's much harder. The problem was not only God above the emperor. The problem was the institution above the emperor. Rome didn't bring God. Rome brought authority, and Emperor China already had authority. That's why the collision became so intense. This was not small empire versus big religion. This was universal empire meeting universal church. China say all under heaven. Rome say one universal church. That's two giants trying to fit through one door. For Western viewers, they should feel similar. Europe spent centuries fighting over the relationship between kings and religious authority. Popes and the emperor fight. Church and state fight. Kings wanted control. Church claimed higher law. So we look at Kangxi, we shouldn't say how strange China couldn't understand religion. A better response is China faces its own version of a universal problem. Who rules the ruler? Who defines the sacred? Who gets the final word when family, state, conscience, and God disagree? The question is not Asian. It's still alive. Every society has rituals, secret words, gestures that it refuses to let outsiders define. Every society has things it says are just culture until someone else calls in religion. So, who destroyed the Jesuit dream in China? Not one thing, not just Rome, not just Kangxi, not just stubborn missionary, not just Chinese conservatism. It was one collision of four fears. Rome feared impurity. Kangxi feared foreign control. The Jesuits fear losing China. Chinese converts fear losing their family. And between those fears do one gesture, a bow to the ancestors, a small movement of the body, a massive collision of words. That's history at its most elegant and most absurd, because sometimes history doesn't turn on a battlefield. It turns on whether a bow is memory, or worship, or both. So the controversy teaches us that cultural exchange is not just politeness. It's not enough to say we respect each other. Sometimes real respect, reveal real disagreement. But because if ancestor rights are only cultural, banning them is arrogance. But if they are worship, allowing them may be betrayal. Good manner can solve some metaphysics. Tea helps, but not enough. This was not a story to stupid people falling to understand each other. It's a story intelligent people understand just enough to destroy deeply. That's more frightening and more human. So remember, Christianity did not fail in China simply because China was closed. The door opened, science entered, court listened, the emperor tolerated, but then Christianity ran into one place, and when Chinese civilization was most sensitive, the family, ancestor, ritual order, the dead, and in China even the dead are socially active. This may be the most Chinese plot twist in history. The dead ancestor doesn't speak, but somehow he still efforts foreign policy. Sometimes civilizations don't collide over armies, they collide over gesture. And sometimes the fate of a global religion turns on the meaning of a bow. Yeah, that's for today. I'll make more interesting video in the following days. Welcome to subscribe. I'll see you next time.